Georgia, Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, those are your big dogs. Like, nobody's surprised if one of those teams goes on to win the national championship. But even with that being said, now we're in the 12-team playoff era. So I think it's reasonable for us to discuss, hey, who could be that team that March Madness style gets hot, gets in the dance, and ends up playing their best football at the right time, and maybe, just maybe, they get the right seeding, they get the right path, and heck, maybe they play for a national championship. So if that's going to be if that's going to happen, I do still think that national championship teams to some degree have a certain formula. And in 2024 with the 12-team playoff, I think there are two key ingredients. The first is line of scrimmage play. Like, you cannot roll out there against an Oregon or against a Georgia, Ohio State, or a Texas and just get manhandled. Like, I'm all for throwing the football. I'm all for scheming around the trenches and finding ways to be competitive. But, like, this is grown man football when you play in December and January. Big people move small people. So if you do not have the big people to hold serve in these certain spots, you do not have a chance. So all these teams, in my estimation, have that ingredient. The second ingredient, do you have a quarterback that could make the difference for you? Key word there is could. So for a couple of these teams now, we're projecting a little bit. So maybe we haven't seen their best football just yet, but I believe, based on them being in this conversation, that they are good enough and have the skill set to trend the right direction. Like we said, play their best football at the most opportune time to allow them to compete for a national championship. College football sickos, make sure you're subscribed right here. Whether you're a Tennessee fan, a Miami fan, a Texas fan, a Georgia fan, whoever you are a fan of, an Oregon fan, whoever you're a fan of, we're going to talk about your team, and we're going to talk about the greatest sport on the face of planet Earth every single day. So make sure you're locked in. We appreciate you in advance for being subscribed. So let's start here. Texas A&M, they are the team that I would feel most confident about outside of that top four group to compete for a national championship. If you keep track of our playoff picture rankings that we put out every Sunday in video format, we put out on my socials, Instagram, Twitter, at PicKell. Always get a lot of pushback there. Shocker, we don't agree on college football rankings. I don't know why. But we are much higher on A&M than the rest of the college football public. We have them at our number 6 spot right now based on what they've done. But I think they might be better. They might be even better than that. Texas A&M could survive a cage match, most importantly, with any of those football teams. Like, I'm not so sure I wouldn't take what Texas A&M has on the defensive line of scrimmage over a couple of those 4 teams we already spoke to. They're allowing 3 yards a carry, and they're averaging 5 yards a carry on the ground offensively behind Le'Veon Moss and Daniels. And you have to believe now with Marcel Reed, again, I'm making the assumption he's the guy here going forward. If he's not, then we'll have to circle back. You have to believe that yards per carry number will only increase, if not with Marcel Reed's legs, but with what he forces you to honor if you're that second level of the defense. So the bottom line here is if you get into a spot where it's just like we're beating the crap out of each other, A&M can hang out with that. A&M can beat you that way. I'll make that clear. Now, the great unknown is what they have at quarterback, right? Like, Marcel Reed is going to be the focal point of every discussion around A&M as it pertains to what they want to do in the postseason, in the SEC championship, and beyond that. So I think the question here is, does the offense have another gear to it? I just told you in the previous segment, I think that they do. But I think with Marcel Reed, with me believing they have that extra gear, that makes A&M extremely, extremely difficult to line it up against. Because you have the ad-lib potential of a dual-threat quarterback, and then you also have the potential, if he has that next gear, to take advantage of what you have on the perimeter. And this is not to knock Connor Wegman, but like, we have seen Noah Thomas play better football games with Marcel Reed as the guy. I don't think that's coincidence. Noah Thomas, for those of y'all that are unaware, the best receiver in my money for A&M this season. Jaree Barber also, you see him having success. So I think what he commands of the defense and what he can be as a passer is going to be the difference maker for you. So if you get into a shootout, I'm optimistic that Marcel Reed could have enough juice here. We'll see against South Carolina if he's able to kind of push it downfield. But again, I'm believing that Marcel Reed is the guy to lead A&M, and I think they're a national title contender for those reasons. Now, Tennessee is another team that I think we have to factor in here to the national champion discussion. This is like a hard hat, lunch pail kind of Tennessee team. And that's not to say they weren't before. I think they were last year to some extent. In 2022, they definitely were, but we were all just like going for the eye candy of Jalen Hyatt scoring 5 touchdowns and Hendon Hooker throwing the ball all over the yard. This is a team now that is allowing the fewest yards per carry in America. Let me say that again. They are allowing the fewest yards per carry in all of college football. Less than Georgia, less than Ohio State, less than Texas, less than Bama. Like, this is a real deal defensive front. And how often have we talked about with Tennessee, man, if they could just match up in the trenches, they're going to have a chance. Well, guess what? They are now matching up in the trenches. In fact, they're doing more than matching up in the trenches. They are dominating in the trenches, okay? That's the defensive side of the ball. Offensively, Dylan Sampson's run for over 100 yards darn near every game. The only game he didn't was against Oklahoma. In that game, he still went over 90 yards. So the question then becomes, okay, at quarterback, what are we getting here? Like, Nico, can you be the guy to win a national championship? Right now, you have some to be desired, right? Like, I think it's fair to question if he has the juice to go win a national title. That's obviously true. But again, that's not the point of this discussion. In the 12-team playoff, you get the allowance to develop and to become better throughout the course of a season. Okay, so if Nico stays what he is and moving into November, then yeah, Tennessee's probably going to lose a game to Georgia at some point. That's probably going to happen. But let's just go ahead and let's just be generous here and assume that Nico Iamaleava isn't done progressing as a quarterback in college football. I mean, my goodness, the guy's had 7 starts under his belt. I think it's fair to assume he's not yet a finished product. So with that being a stable thing to talk about, that Nico is going to get better, who in college football at the quarterback position has a higher ceiling than number 8 for Tennessee? Given his physical giftings, given his athleticism, given what we've seen him do in flashes, like if he's able to sustain some of those things and right along with that get some help to elevate his play, looking at you offensive line, looking at you wide receiver core, how good could Nico be? And if Nico achieves his potential and reaches closer to what his high ceiling is, you pair it with the defense. Again, I'm just saying, if it all trends that direction, there's a lot of ifs and potentials here, but I just think that deserves some credit here when we talk about Tennessee as it pertains to them throwing their hat in the ring for a national championship kind of team. Now, obviously, you can't have the letdown like you had against Arkansas, and we'll learn a lot about the Vols when they go play against Georgia, so that's that. Now, the team that I would say I feel third most confident about competing for a national championship is Miami. I should have prefaced with this. This is all in descending order. So A&M, I would say I feel most confident about. Tennessee, second most confident. Miami in that mix here when it comes to third, who could compete for a national championship. I think Miami now, as much as optically they've had some things that make us say, oh, I don't know about the Canes, man. I don't know if I love that you got to have a Virginia Tech Hail Mary overturned to beat the Hokies. I don't know that I love that I'm watching a game at 1 a.m. Central and seeing Cam Ward have to will a football team back against Cal. Like, I don't know if that screams national title contender to me. Totally fair. But I do think this team is more of a trenches football team than they have probably shown to this point. Some of that is they get behind in games and then you can't run the football because you're down 2 scores like Cam Ward put on the cape. Let's go get it. I think defensively, they have the caliber of personnel to be able to at least hold up against a Georgia or an Ohio State. Now, hold up is a very broad term. Could they hold up for the first half? Could they hold up for all 4 quarters? Could they hold up for a playoff run? All questions that we got to ask. But you look at the personnel and what they did via the portal, getting a Simeon Barrow, getting a Tyler Barron, guys that have played and had success in the SEC and the Big Ten. Probably teams that you're going to have to find a way to beat if you want to win a national championship. You pair it with a Ruben Bain whenever he's healthy. He's a monster. So I think the personnel gives me some encouragement. And then going back to the offensive side, I think Damian Martinez and what they are on the ground, they have more in the tank there. So I think they're serviceable in the trenches. I don't know if they're dominant, but I'll say this, like the end-all be-all here, the magic card they could just lay down any given Saturday, and it could be in the college football playoff if they get in the dance. Like, Cam Ward is the ultimate palms up, shoulder shrug kind of guy. Not him specifically, but what he forces defensive coordinators and defenses to do. Like, he does things on the football field, and this is not trying to be hyperbolic, but I just think it's matter of fact. He does things that don't make sense. Like, you're not supposed to be tackled and then Dr. Pepper scholarship competition chest pass to your tight end to pick up a first down. Like, you're not supposed to be dropping back and calling out that a defense has 12 men on the field before you go throw a laser. Like, I get it. It sounds excessive. I get it. Sounds like we're just on the Cam Ward train here, but I'm just telling you, with what he is as a just overall football player, and if he's the motor for this Miami team, if he gets his best and Miami gets a little bit more around him, I don't think you want to see them in a tournament setting. So I think Miami, in that way, just any given Saturday in a 12-team playoff, I wouldn't want to play them. I wouldn't want to play them. Now, there's one more team I want to talk about here, and they're the team that I would say is like an ultimate sleeper. There's a couple others you could have mentioned. I could have mentioned Indiana. I'm going to wait a little bit before we talk about national title with them. You could have mentioned, I think, Ole Miss and LSU. Again, I've seen a couple of things from those operations that give me some cause for concern. Kentucky game for Ole Miss. For LSU, I don't love that you're running for less than 30 yards against Texas A&M. This team that I'm going to talk about right now is, again, just the ultimate sleeper. I don't know if I would put them in the national title contender conversation, but I do think we got to at least mention them. Hey, Dabo Swinney now, he's got 2 national titles on his mantle, right? I mean, I understand those were different teams, a different playoff format, but I do think that with how they're built and how they're continuing to evolve, it just makes sense to at least keep tabs on Clemson. All right, I'm not even sure they're not the best team in the ACC, and I'm not sure they wouldn't beat Miami if they got a one-game scenario, but that is what it is. The thing that will get thrown into this conversation so fast, in the comment section so fast, is you watch the Georgia game, 34-3. Yeah, I did watch the Georgia game. I did see Georgia absolutely do whatever they wanted in the second half of that football game. But what I would say is if you watch the first half of that game, this is why they're a sleeper and why they're kind of on the fringe of this conversation to me. The first half of that game, Clemson in the trenches held up. Like, it wasn't until Georgia started getting on the perimeter and then throwing the football off of the misdirection when they had success on the ground. So what that tells me is, okay, Clemson, at the very least, has enough up front personnel-wise to be able to, in some way, shape, or form, match up a little bit with those teams. And then the question becomes, okay, well, what are they offensively? And that was kind of the question we asked all offseason. Hey, if Clemson's going to get to where they want to go, winning the ACC, back in the playoff, and dare I say, compete for a national championship, offense has got to be explosive. And we would say that, and then we would kind of just like shrug it off and say, yeah, but they're probably not going to do, like, yeah, we've kind of seen what they are. I get they haven't played a team like Georgia in some time. I get that Florida State is not what we thought they would be. But right now, Clemson is one of the more explosive offenses in college football. Let that sink in for a second. Clemson Tigers, the team last year that averaged, I think, like something like 6 yards a pass, which is abysmal, starting to cook a little bit. Okay, they're top 25 when it comes to yards per pass, and they are top 5 in the country when it comes to yards per carry. Translation, what Garrett Riley is doing now, and the way that Cade Klubnik is playing with confidence, it's starting to work. Now, do they sustain it? I don't know. Can they do it against a Georgia if they were to play them next week? I don't know. It's also worth noting, for any of these teams, do you draw an Oregon in the first round? Do you draw a Georgia in the first round? Like, who's to say any of these teams don't end up getting the 5 seed? If Texas A&M, if they end up getting to Atlanta and lose that football game, I'd have a hard time not putting them at the 5 spot. And that path from the 5 spot, you play the Big 12 champ the second round, you play the G5 rep the first round, like, I would feel okay about my chances. So let's try and not be too focused on the, oh, well, they wouldn't beat Georgia tomorrow. They don't play Georgia tomorrow. They don't play Texas tomorrow. So with that being said, I think all those teams deserve a little bit of attention for who could factor in to the national title conversation. Not picking them out right now, but I am saying in the 12-team model where you have margin to progress and become better over the course of the season, those teams to me make sense if we're going to discuss the national championship picture.